Thomas Malthus was born in 1766 in England and died in 1834 in England. He was a cleric, scholar, and economist, influential in the fields of political economy and demography. He studied at Jesus College, Cambridge, and engaged with the New Worlds through the 17th and 18th century travel books he read. He observed the growing population of the scientific revolution and its socio-economic conditions with increasing concern, and was seen as a pessimist. While he is widely published, his most notable work is the essay on the principle of population, published in 1789. Malthus was the first economist to propose a systematic theory of population. This theory contradicted the optimistic view prevailing at the time. His work is understood and evaluated within the British domestic context, but actually considers a large global story and attempts to find ways to ameliorate poverty. Malthus's work was inspired by his context. In England, the Industrial Revolution caused increases in agricultural production, medical knowledge, and technological innovation. Because of this, population growth in England and other parts of Europe in the 17th century accelerated dramatically. A critical part of this was the European expansion overseas. European powers began importing food and resources from other parts of the world to make up for what they had in short supply. They also exported surplus populations to the colonies. Despite this, fear of food shortage and famine was still a threat faced by most Europeans. Population growth led people to the margins of subsistence, experiencing intolerable living conditions in the industrial cities. Lack of adequate knowledge about hygiene led to epidemics and hunger, including high mortality, but birth rates still exceeded death rates throughout this period. There was another development as well. The Enlightenment saw politicians and philosophers develop ideas about social justice, poverty relief, and sanitation in the belief of improved living conditions for all. Malthus wrote the essay on the principle of population in 1798 in the context of the industrialization. As an Enlightenment thinker, he was trying to find the natural laws that could explain the persistent existence of poverty in the world. He saw that the average European living standards in the time of the Industrial Revolution were not much better than in the time of the Roman Empire. A proportion of the population would always experience poverty owing to oscillating food availability, he concluded. He discerned elements that were critical to him about population, fertility, mortality, eating patterns, and resource production in all corners of the earth in this book, and was seen as controversial and pessimistic. Malthus understood food to be necessary for human existence. He estimated population sizes and modeled population increases geometrically. He understood that the human population would grow exponentially and that food production could only grow arithmetically, creating a deficit of food relative to mouths. He said, "The power of population is indefinitely greater than the power in the earth to produce subsistence for man." According to Malthus, the population tended to increase at a faster rate than the supply of food could, and over time the population growth would exceed the food availability. This would cause food shortages, which would then lead to famine, disease, and war, which we know now as the Malthusian crisis. Malthus believed in diminishing returns to land. As more people rely on the land for food, the product of each additional person's labor would be less. This means that each person would get less and less food as time goes on. Malthus understood that technological advancements would allow for an increased yield to cater for increased population, but he said that owing to the amount of land available remaining constant, eventually the problem of scarcity would arise inevitably. This is the Malthusian catastrophe. This was encompassed in the assumptions for his model, which include a fixed vital factor production of land, diminishing returns to land, that income will determine population growth, so that more produce will result in happier people will have more babies, and more people will survive owing to technological advancements as well. However, higher survival rates would eventually push living standards back down because there would be a limit to the amount of food that could be yielded, and people would starve. This means that in the model, policies that try to help the poor can't really help the poor in the long term. For example, free vaccines would allow more people to survive in the short run, but in the long run would leave everyone with poorer living standards and starvation. Malthus advocated for population growth control, which he believed would happen regardless, if not with human intervention, such as deciding to have smaller families, which he called negative checks, through natural processes that he called positive checks, such as famine and disease. Although Malthus has been proven wrong, as the world population has managed to grow to almost 8 billion with food production outperforming, Malthusian concerns are not unfounded. Neo-Malthusianism is the 21st century idea that if the population continues to grow, the cost to humanity will be environmental degradation and eventually resource depletion. Some environmentalists use Neo-Malthusian arguments to emphasize the use of contraception and the choice not to have children. Today, we are seeing a demographic transition where birth and death rates are lower than they were in the 18th century because of changing culture and perhaps environmental awareness. However, in the developing world, short-term regional food shortages are still causing price shocks for staples in the 21st century. This reminds us of the Malthus teachings that there needs to be a balance between population and resources, and that humans have to live within an ultimately limited resource base. Although the term Malthusian often refers to pessimistic predictions about the doom of humanity, we must respect Malthus's wide-ranging contributions to the science of demography, statistics, and the history of economic thought. Thank you for listening.